I'll go here. Woohoo! Look at this audience. You go ahead. I'm going to go here. Álvaro, you go. Hi, guys. Look at who made it to the 3 o'clock session on Tuesday. You guys are the stars. Thank you guys all for being here. I'm Margaret Hoover. I am thrilled to be here with funders, activists, all democracy enthusiasts, to talk about, I think what is fair to say is a pretty critical moment in democracy activism and funding. And that's why you're all here. Thank you for sticking with us. It's fair to say the United States is reevaluating its emphasis and the priority it is placing on democracy funding. It's also fair to say that this is happening in a moment where authoritarians around the world are tightening their grip and increasing their funding sources to counter democracy activism in the West. What we are faced with is a crisis, potentially, and I of course, everybody here is going to weigh in on this, and you all may agree with the premise that perhaps a funding shortfall in the democracy investment space could constitute a significant crisis for democracy activism, and that is the premise of our conversation. Damon, who is, this panel is amazing. I've had a chance to get to visit with all of them. And I think I want to start with Damon first, because you, before running the National Endowment for Democracies, are really I don't know if I want to call you a card-carrying Republican, but you have had a long career in Republican circles. You run an organization that was founded by Ronald Reagan, and you found yourself in March of this year backed into a corner and forced to sue the Trump administration over $240 million of frozen funding to democracy organizations around the world. So I'd like you to, everybody's going to give their overwhelming view of where we are in this moment, but first, can you just set the table for where you think we are in this moment in terms of democracy funding and activism?
Thank you, Margaret. As an incredible journalist, she goes straight for it. First of all, it's really awesome to be here in Oslo, and I want to give a shout out to the Human Rights Foundation for bringing such an incredible group of people together. This is why we do what we do. It's awesome to be with you. So you asked sort of the heart of the question. It's been sporty season in Washington. We've been through it a little bit at the Endowment. Those of you who may not have followed it, at the end of January, we're a foundation publicly funded by the U.S. Congress. We're America's Foundation for Freedom, supporting 1,700 partners in 100 countries around the world. It really is sort of a pro-democratic ground game that demonstrates the American people standing by those who seek freedom globally. And so we're a foundation. We move, last year we did $286 million in grants, so we're moving money a lot. But it's public funds, so they sit at the Treasury Department. On January 28th, we started to continue to draw down as we do, and nothing came out. So it's okay. The foreign assistance review is underway. NED is not foreign assistance. We're not foreign assistance through the executive branch. We're funded by the US Congress in a different approach. So we went through some period of time where it was pretty clear we can't get access to our cash.
Totally frozen.
Totally frozen. And for the first time in our 42-year history, we had to break the faith with some of our partners, and that's really tough.
And you're looking at Pema because your organization is funded in part by NED.
So Margaret,
so you were unable to make your commitments to Pema's organization.
I hate to say it, but that was the case.
We're still on good terms, though.
Well, it is because of people like Pema. It is because of, and I won't say names, because many of the people we support around the world, we have to be careful. It was because of our partners in Turkey and Bahrain and Nicaragua, those who are here right now, that we had a big debate. We did about 200 meetings on Capitol Hill between January 21st and March 4th, the day we had to submit a
200 meetings
lawsuit.
between the middle of January to the end of March? Or
Yes.
the beginning of March?
Yes.
How does that track with your normal set of meetings?
Oh, that was an uptick. That was an uptick. But look, we have a lot of partners up on Capitol Hill. We're America's Foundation for Freedom, and most American politicians, when our partners show up in Washington, they love to have their picture taken with you. They love to hear your stories. They love to know how you are standing up to tyrants, and they are proud that the American people are behind you. And so this didn't quite jive. Okay, we got some challenges here, but understood there was a lot going on, a lot. So my board is half Democrat, half Republican. We have members of Congress on my board. So we do not sue. We get involved with senators and House members and make phone calls, and we work issues. It didn't work. It didn't work. And across the board, on left and right, those who really do believe in American support for freedom advised us we needed to take a legal path. And it was pretty contentious. It's a difficult issue to bring your board along on something like that. And yet I faced my board and I said, how can I come and face you? You know the people we support. You know how courageous they are, how brave they are. Like, they stand up under extremely difficult circumstances. You know who you are. You know what you do. We have the honor of supporting you. Our whole philosophy is you're not our implementer of our ideas. We find amazing people and uplift them. And here we are jammed, having to break off folks, which is very dangerous in closed societies. If you, all of a sudden, the activity stops at a moment when the world knows U.S. dollars are stopping flowing, it can be a trigger to dictators. I've got some suspicions here. It is deadly serious. Mm-hmm. And so we really had an honest conversation and said, I don't think that we can protect our reputation if we don't really make the case and argue and fight for what we know is right. So we lost a few board members along the way. And finally, we acted on March 5th. And within a few days, all of our accounts were unfrozen. And it actually helped by standing up. It helped people who work in this administration, who believe in democracy and freedom. It helped them actually help us. It provided a level of deterrence and protection. So we're in a season. This whole premise of this conversation, I've totally shattered my introduction. I won't do it. I'll come back to it later.
We'll get there.
But we're in a sporty season right now where the debate about how the United States should engage in the world, how we should think about support for democracy and freedom, it's front and center. And I want to unpack that. I want to get to that. But I am convinced by speaking to member after member after member, as well as speaking to many folks that serve in this administration and over time in administrations, that the work that many of you in this audience do, it is not seen as Democrat or Republican. It is not seen as left and right in Washington. It is seen as a fundamental expression of the best values that we share for fundamental freedoms. And I know there is an overwhelming majority of folks that vote in the US Congress, for example, that want to see you succeed in your struggle. And that means we are bound and determined to succeed in ours. So I haven't been traveling. I've been Washington bound, but I wanted to make it here. I was actually with this man when I had to depart and get back to Washington. But I wanted to come here to the Oslo Freedom Forum because it's been a minute since I've been surrounded by the people we love and the reason why we do this. And so I came here to get a little bit of energy and oxygen because we're going back into making the case. Our budget has been proposed to be zeroed out. I'm pretty confident that there is an overwhelming majority of support in the US Congress for you, and that means for America's Foundation for Freedom, but we got some work to do.
So if I can put a cap on it. So you're feeling optimistic that congressional funds and federal funds will return to NED?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
In the upcoming budgets?
I am.
Okay, that's incredible.
This is not inevitable. We've been in a little bit of an existential fight, but this case is strong. I mean, first of all, we had no choice but to go down a legal pathway. We were left with no option, and folks understood that on both the left and the right. We also were really clear, if you look at our language and statute, this was about protecting congressional prerogatives. It was a different purpose behind, we're not the resistance. We are part of how this works. But third, it's given us a moment to make the case both to the American people, the American public. We've gone far more public with a lot of our work since this whole effort began at the beginning of the year, to underscore it is so profoundly in America's long-term interest that the world is more free. Like, this is not about one short-term transaction. This is so good for the American people. When you succeed, man, does it take pressure off us and what we're going to spend money on, whether it's the military or whether it's our borders. And I think that case is important to make right now. And the final part is, I came into NED just 4 years ago almost, as a reformer. I believe passionately in support for democracy. But I have also been in my job, and I have watched when Russia invaded Ukraine. Many of our partners who had US government or EU contracts took 6 months to renegotiate so that they could be relevant in a peaceful way in the fight. I've watched coups in the Sahel where our partners, we could move with them like that. And if you had a contract from a government, we were acting like compliance officers and accountants, not freedom fighters. That is not what our adversaries are doing. That is not how we win. There does need to be reform, and that is an instinct I embrace right now. I think this is an opportunity to get that right.
So that, I want to put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that, because this conversation is going to be about sort of reform in the philanthropic space. It's also going to be about sort of the innovations that private philanthropy and foundations that you all represent, Álvaro and Greg, are innovating to answer this moment of potential philanthropic crisis. But Pema, I want to go to you next. You are the Executive Director of Students for Free Tibet. You are a recipient of NED funding, amongst others. How, as an activist and organizer, and you were telling me backstage that as an activist and organizer, you don't actually have many opportunities to talk about funding in this way. How do you see this moment in terms of philanthropy and sustained innovative investment in your space?
Thank you, Margaret. And not only do we not get a lot of opportunities to talk about funding, anyone who's an activist in this room can probably agree that we shy away, or we actually avoid those like the plague, to talk about something other than the movement and the human rights work that we're doing. So when I got this opportunity, I really wanted to share a little bit about my experience through the funding crisis. As a Tibetan, as an activist, as someone who has committed my existence towards fighting for the Tibetan people, I work with young people as young as 15 or 16 years old, university students, elders from our community who have been through generations of colonization. And when this funding crisis happened, there was this moment where we were sitting on this Zoom call with leaders from our Tibetan freedom movement across the world. Myself, who had only been the director of SFT for about 3 years, but an activist my whole life. And I was sitting across this call with activists that had been in this movement for 3 decades. And they were telling me that this was the most challenging thing that they've ever experienced as an activist. So my first thought was, okay, thank God it's not just me. And then my second thought was, what do we do in this moment to ensure that not one NGO or one organization, but that our movement is not being set back by a global funding crisis that's beyond our control? Mm-hmm. And I had kind of 4 main takeaways that I really wanted to share with you guys, and I hope that my perspective as an activist can be relatable and helpful. The first thing I realized was it was one of the most isolating experiences that I've had as a director of one of the largest Tibetan grassroots youth organizations, knowing that it's my job to fund those trainings that change the world. It's my job to fund those campaigns that bring down $140 billion companies from complying with China. What do we do? And it felt like this moment where I just wanted to be by myself and think, what do I need to do? What pressure rests on my shoulders? And in that moment, what I really learned was that it's in those times where we need to actually push aside that feeling of self-isolation and actually lean into our community and look to one another. What do we do to make our movement stronger than it was yesterday? And the reality, thank you, the reality is that those difficult conversations during a funding crisis can't be the first time you're working in true solidarity. So at the Oslo Freedom Forum, we talk about building strength with other movements, which is critical. But I think one thing I learned is that in those moments, we lean on the relationships we've built within our own movement. And that's something that I can say on behalf of Tibetans and many of the other activists I know from other movements isn't always easy. It's not always easy to sit across the table from leaders from your own movement that you agree on with many issues and also disagree on with a lot of issues, and put aside everything and think, what comes next for our movement? How do we get the win for Tibet, for human rights, and against China? That's challenging, and it requires year-long building with your partners, decades-long building in order to be able to meet the moment when the crisis comes. And the second thing which I really took away is that activists and funders need to be a team. So within 24 hours, a lot of our funders were able to meet with us and talk with us and strategize with us as a team. Because the blowback of these global funding crises have the power to actually strengthen authoritarian regimes in a terrifying way. And if funders are looking at activists like implementers, as Damon had used that word, and not as team members, then we are actually not moving as a cohesive unit in the most efficient way to stand up against these authoritarians. So what that looks like is being on a call every week with people that are doing 200 meetings a week, but taking the time to speak for an hour or 2 hours and strategize about how to mitigate this funding crisis on your movement. People like Celine, who brought us into her office on a busy day and met with us and actually wanted to hear the stories of what's going on to activists on the ground. That's something that I think a lot of funders can learn a lot from some of the incredible funders that I've had the opportunity of working with. And it's quite long, but the third thing I would say is, for the activists and the movement leaders in the room, resilient funding is diversified funding. And we need to have resilient funding, even though it's very challenging. So at SFT, an example of that is our Rungzin Circle. It's a monthly donor program where college students and elderly people can sign up and become a subscriber, $5 a month, and support the Tibetan freedom movement and the vision that we believe in together. And that's something that I don't think you have to be a huge movement or organization to do. Even if you're an activist that's starting an organization for the first time and you have 5 friends. This is something that we all need to be doing and growing if we truly want to be resilient and strong movements that are changing the face of this earth.
Can I ask you a question? Was that a new innovation in your funding diversification because of this moment?
That was something which existed before, but it was making up almost an inconsequential percentage of our organization's work.
Okay.
And our goal was to actually make it into a percentage on our line item, say 20% of the trainings we do are resilient and crisis-proof. 30%, 40%, how do we set that as our goal over the next years?
Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Thanks. But did you get through all 4?
There's one more.
There's one more. What's the 4th?
It's a mystery, but I'm just joking. The 4th one is one that I think, as a Tibetan who's countering China, I had a lot of time to think about that, as Margaret mentioned. Everybody in this room knows how difficult it is to fund the critical work. And I think everyone in this room can also understand and appreciate the outsized influence of the Chinese economy on every field. You go to the United Nations, and people don't want to meet with you or work with you. They don't want to give you a badge to step foot on this global stage. You go to a company and you want to collaborate. They're funded by China. They're working with China. You speak with a funder, they have staff on the ground, and it's life-threatening, so they cannot fund your organization. And the Chinese economy basically influences and impacts every aspect of media and every aspect of even our daily lives, people in this room who are freedom fighters. Now imagine that all of this influence and power that the Chinese economy has built is weaponized against your cause, against you and your people. Not only is it challenging to raise human rights funding in general, but as an organization that's countering the Chinese government, one of the most uncontained authoritarians in history. What do you do when the people that are supposed to be funding these great causes, many of them may have made or even continue to make their money in China? And it poses this challenge that I think I see a lot of folks from Hong Kong and East Turkestan and Tibet in the room, and it's something that you really have to think about. And in particular, a key player in closing that gap really needs to be private foundations that are willing to step up and sort of take that leadership to be able to really fight and invest in a future where human rights and democracy can flourish in every region. And one of the most critical steps in doing that is countering Xi Jinping directly and head on. And I see so many of the activists in this room from different countries who are able to understand the importance of countering Xi Jinping. And so that's something which I think private foundations and public funders also need to understand that, or also need to sort of give emphasis to.
Pema, thank you. So the reason I wanted you two to go first is because I wanted to be able to put a spotlight on sort of how critically important the funding is at this moment. And I wanted you two, Representative Greg from the Templeton Foundation and Álvaro, I'll go to you next, from the Reynolds Foundation, because both of you, and particularly you, Álvaro, are focused on what private philanthropy can do in this moment that is a little different to double down on democracy funding. I know you've thought a lot about this, and we'll just start with the headline. $500 million will be devoted in the next 10 years to democracy funding from the Reynolds Foundation. How are you going to do it?
Thank you. First and foremost, thank you very much to the Human Rights Foundation and the Oslo Freedom Forum for creating this space for kindred spirits and allies to have the moment at this inflection point in time of thinking about the future of freedom and democracy. We cannot take that for granted. Thank you very much to all of you. Second, we're ready to fight. We're ready to fight and we're ready to step in. And it's very important to do it. As our founder, Tim Reynolds, says, the time is now. And he's always trying to focus on the target right now, which is how we're going to revert the rise of authoritarianism, which is the #1 cause affecting humanity right now. And for that, we're trying to bring 3 things. The first one is philosophy. We do things with philosophy. So for philosophy, I brought a little definition of what philanthropy means. The etymology of the word philanthropy comes from philos, which means loving a friend. And anthropos comes from human being. So philanthropy means love for humankind or friendship towards humanity. So let's start with philosophy. In order to tackle the crisis of funding, we need to understand why are we doing this? And I think that we have right now to step in because dictators and autocrats are not winning because they're stronger. They are winning because they're more coordinated and they work together. And the freedom movement is scattered, currently defunded. Only 1% of the total philanthropic pie goes to freedom and democracy. Only 1%. And from that 1%, only 1% goes into authoritarian regimes. So just in the last 20 years, 60 countries has declined on civic liberties and individual freedoms. So how are we going to revert that problem with only 1% of the 1% of the funding? And what the Reynolds Foundation is doing is still really small. We need more philanthropies and we need more family offices to step into this fight. There's a lot of philanthropic giving in religious organizations, in museums, in sports, in clean water, and that's important. But all of those issues are tied to the fight to authoritarianism. So we need to create a global narrative to bring all these people through the lenses of where would we have to focus our energy and our time. And this goes to my second principle, that we do things with philosophy, but also we're data-driven. So let's talk a little bit about data. I brought some points that I want to discuss with you. As we learned these 2 days, we need to transform how we fight. And many pro-democracy efforts relied on outdated one-size-fits-all models. That is failing to account to the complexity and the modern adaptability of autocrats and dictators. In short, we're losing the battle. And why? Let me go to these points. innovation, and accountability. 40% of the funding for the people that is doing freedom and democracy work goes almost to overhead and administrative expenses and not to the activists in the front lines. There's only a few organizations that are adapting to these innovations, like the net led by Damon Wilson. It's one of the few organizations in Washington, D.C. that is understanding the local trends and the rise of AI, also used to suppress human rights, especially by China. If we don't understand the data and what is driven this cause, we cannot create solutions that will fight the good fight. We cannot provide these models of one-size-fits-all models. Therefore, what do we need to do? We need to understand the activists in the front lines. We need to ask. That's why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and listen more to the activists and what are their struggles, their daily issues. We need to survey them, talk to them, organize them, without telling them what to do. That approach is over. We need to ask our activists, how can we help? With time, with treasure, with talent, with strategic intent. And that leads me to my final point, that we are pathological optimistic. And optimism right now is super important. We need to be, as Damon said, happy warriors. Because if not, the dictators win. So we have to get, every morning, look at the mirror and say, we get to do this. We get to do this. So Team Reynolds and Caroline Reynolds have devoted not only their family, their resources, and their energy, and even their kids stepping in. And the next generation of philanthropists that are here in this audience need to step into the cause for freedom and democracy, boldly, boldly. I want to raise a question to the audience to start thinking about this. We need to tackle philanthropy giving to freedom and democracy with investment banking principles, moral philosophical principles, and pathological optimism. And what do I mean by investment banking principles? We need to attack the projects, or not to attack, but unpack the projects. Not seeing them only as returns and theories of change and log models or KPIs, but as the humans that are in those front lines, because people don't invest in organizations, people invest in humans that they trust. Second, in order to build trust, we need to provide community as a strategy. This idea of Alex Glaston, that he has created global communities of togetherness to then apply it to the fight for freedom, is a strategy. The creation of the ecosystem and the social fabric to fight is a strategy. And we cannot take that for granted. And lastly, if we bring more investors and philanthropists and family offices into the fight, they're gonna ask, okay, how are we gonna deploy this capital? So we need to provide them the opportunities to understand the data, educate them and connect them with the activists in the front lines, and finally create the spaces and the mechanisms so they can belong to a community that will last different generations, that will last over time. And this leads me to the question that I want to raise. How can we get together in a multidisciplinary way, from activists, philanthropists, scientists, think tank leaders, journalists, funders, to tackle the problem of only 1% of the global philanthropic giving goes to freedom and democracy? I don't have the answers, but at the Reynolds Foundation, with team leadership, we're going to start at least tackling it, and independently doing research to collaborate with all of you activists in the front lines to do that. And you have our word that we'll do that with optimism, with a smile in our faces, with opening doors, as Celine did with you at the Human Rights Foundation, but more importantly, with a complete resolute that if we come together into this fight, we are going to win.
Bravo. We'll get to this as we come back through the panel, but $500 million is what the Reynolds Foundation is going to commit to democracy funding in the next 10 years. But you said to me previously, what's needed is $40 billion.
We need about $40 billion in the next 10 years to actually have a chance to fight dictatorships.
Okay, we're going to unpack that next. We're going to go to the John Templeton Foundation. Put a pin in that. We're coming back. Greg at the John Templeton Foundation. So I'd like, every foundation has their own approach and their own way that they approach this. You guys don't have democracy funding necessarily specifically in your charge. It's individual freedom and free markets, which coincidentally has a lot in common with democracy. But how do you at the John Templeton Foundation think about this moment in philanthropy and in democracy building. And how are you going to continue to move forward against the backdrop of what you've just heard from your co-panelists?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Margaret. And thank you also to the Human Rights Foundation, and most especially to everybody here. I'm relatively a novice in this space compared to my esteemed colleagues. And you reach a certain age where you stop feeling so many emotions, and yet I found myself completely overwhelmed hearing the stories that you've been telling. So this is truly an honor and a privilege. I'm going to answer your question maybe in a roundabout way, because I think a lot of what has been said so far, I'm learning already just from what my colleagues have been saying. As Margaret mentioned, I'm at the John Templeton Foundation, where I direct individual freedom and free markets. And we have an overall approach where our giving in general is intended to promote flourishing individuals as members of families, as members of communities, as individuals, as members of their broader society. And in fact, support for individual freedom and free markets is enshrined in our charter. And that's in large measure because Sir John, our founder, understood flourishing and progress in a very specific way. He didn't think that you could understand those things separately from freedom itself. So how does that play out for democracy? He didn't. Well, if any of you are interested, there are a lot of books written by Sir John. He's passed away now, but there are many books that he wrote on these topics. And there's a little passage from his book, The Humble Approach, which you can find in any bookstore, on democracy that I wanted to share. It's a little bit of a long quote, but you'll forgive me. Only God knows whether the bounteous acceleration of progress and increase in knowledge over the past 500 years will end. But if it does, most likely it will be halted by the greatest roadblock to human progress and happiness, authoritarian government. Government maintains freedom to the extent that it gives each person freedom from domination by others, but unrestrained government intervention in the economic, cultural, or spiritual life of its citizens reduces that freedom. More research needs to be done on which government activities protect and which restrict freedom. Now, he doesn't go into a lot of detail about what those activities are, but then he does say this. A democratic government, by enacting clear and impartial laws, usually protects freedom, whereas governments which respond to the whims of a dictator, an elite, or a bureaucracy lead to fear among the citizenry and domination of the people by the government instituted to serve them. Now, what he said there, I think, is common to all of you. You all know this sentiment. It's been repeated by others in many different ways. Democracies are not perfect. We know that, of course, but they are the best forms of government we have discovered for protecting that inviolable dignity and freedom of human beings. So what is our funding in light of that, right? What does our funding look like? Well, as I mentioned, we have a charter, and we have a very strict charter at the foundation that restricts and delimits and defines the sort of funding that we can engage in. I joke with people, and I apologize to those not from the US, but it's easier to change the US Constitution than it is to change the John Templeton Foundation Charter. And it can be changed in theory, but it takes an act of God, I think, to do so. So, what do we specifically do for our particular area of funding within the foundation? Well, Sir John wanted us to look into research and education about the nature, causes, implications, and importance of freedom, free markets, entrepreneurship, and competition. And that includes, by the way, dissemination of the results of that research through outreach beyond just a traditional classroom. So that could be through media, through advocacy, through academia, through business, through nonprofits, through the culture, and so forth. So that sort of defines the type of funding that we do. Another feature, though, of the funding is that Sir John thought in terms of generations. It's actually in the charter that he thinks that the foundation should exist in perpetuity, it's set up to exist that way, and that some ideas that have import now, that don't appear to have import now, could have import centuries later. So Álvaro's comments got me thinking a little bit about this now, because of course the time for freedom is now, and yet in our foundation we think about the long term. Yeah. So what can we do to invest in the ideals of freedom underlying constitutional governments, especially democracies, such that we can sustain those ideas, keep the embers burning for freedom for generations to come, including our current generation. One of the things I think we can do at the foundation, and one thing we benefit from, is being in spaces such as this, because we learn from the activists, we learn from all of you about what the particular shape and features of the needs for freedom look like in each generation, even though the ideal of freedom remains timeless. And partly this is because not everybody agrees on the value of freedom. If some of you may be old enough to remember all the talk of the end of history, and of course we know now at this crazy point that it looks like, in fact, we could be going backward. So even when freedom looks like it's secure, we know that it's not.
Yeah.
That is why we continue to invest in the generation and the promotion of the ideas, because we believe that it's important that no matter where you are, no matter how dark things are, because things have gotten very dark for some people and have remained dark for a very long time, that someone somewhere cares about freedom, that something in the culture is there promoting, sustaining, fostering, spreading the message of freedom. That's the sort of attitude that we take, and that sort of informs the investments that we make at the foundation. It often means in times that we invest in the multipliers of liberty. So groups like the Human Rights Foundation have received grants from us because they have the more local knowledge we don't have about how to invest wisely to keep those ideas going through the various channels around the world. And we're very privileged and honored to be able to support you all that way. I think, I don't know what the right way is to support democracy. Obviously, we wouldn't have this panel if we knew, and of course, we probably wouldn't even have the need for this event. I do think that when there is an emergent division of labor among philanthropies and funders and families, governments, or whatever, with regard to how democracy is promoted, we should respect that specialization, because we don't really know how these different approaches and efforts hold the struggle for freedom together. So if you remove one, the whole thing could collapse. So I think it's a good thing that people take different tacks and different approaches to support democracy. Some people do that through grassroots support. Some people do that through policy. Some people support the foot soldiers. Some people support litigation. Some people support education and research and so forth. All these specializations matter. And it's also another comment I think I want to make is that, we know that we believe in freedom, which means that we believe that individuals are agents able to make decisions on their own. So we never believe that any investment that we make will have a predetermined outcome. We know that would be hubristic to think otherwise. But we do think that insofar as there's a conversation to be had, that we can help. We have a responsibility and a privilege, given the resources that we have, to be part of that and help give support to those, especially those who have been forbidden through some atrocity of their governments from taking part in that conversation. That's a role I think that we need to consider playing. Again, we don't know what the outcome of that will be. This is an ongoing struggle. We know it won't end. You mentioned we don't know how to solve the problem, right? We don't know it long term, but that's where we are.
Thanks for that, Greg. I think the point in particular, that there's an entire ecosystem of democracy funding that every single piece of it is contributing in a way, and it's hard to tell exactly what, there's no silver bullet for any of it, but it's the contribution of each of the specializations that makes a difference. Okay, we're almost out of time, which is crazy. So we have 20 minutes left. But what I want to do is talk about the innovations in funding. Each of you are seeing them, and then if we have time, I'd love to go to the audience in case there are questions. I think we could probably get through a couple if we do it really, really quickly. But you have been called a reformer, Damon. We've discussed that even though there's this congressionally funded model for the National Endowment for Democracies, you are one of the first to admit that there are places in the US government that have not always been the most efficient at allocating the American tax dollars. And how, first of all, just maybe you can just give a minute to how you see an opportunity in NED's future to refine and make more efficient the direction of federal dollars, and also how you can partner with private philanthropies to continue funding democracy.
Absolutely. And I started tactical at the beginning, so let me take it back up to answer
Go for
that.
it. Yeah.
I mean,
and I just want to be mindful. We have 20 minutes left. I want to get everybody else in and try to get to the audience.
Right.
So I know, but you're a pro, so you're going to do it. Go nuts.
3 quick points. One, the consequential nature of this, the implications of the drawdown and what we do about it. And so we know we're not just in 20 years of a democratic recession, we're in a period that has actually been an authoritarian resurgence, an assault. And that's what's new about this backsliding, because it comes not just with globalization, information that incentivizes polarization, which actually has accompanied the entire decline, but it comes with sharp power, it comes with Autocracy, Inc. And so we are in a new moment for freedom. It is consequential, and it does require innovations, adaptation, and a bit of offense. As we're talking about the funding crisis, we've done supported some research. We've seen Xi, Putin, the autocrats playing footsie, but what it translates into, we estimate that Iran is spending over $1.3 billion annually on influence campaigns, that Russia is a minimum $1.5 billion annually, and China is $7 to $10 billion. And this is only on the influence operation campaigns on an annual basis. And what's just happened? We just had a review of foreign assistance in which 95% of US government funding that stands behind democracy and governance has been reduced. That takes $2.5 billion off the table. Now, I would argue that much of that was not effective democracy assistance, and I would argue that. But nonetheless, it is material and it has affected some who are here. And so that's kind of the moment that puts us in why we need to think about what we do about this. This drawdown has a particular impact on the infrastructure that stands. We've done a global analysis on what this means and what it means for us. And the 3 big areas that have been most hit in this drawdown are election support, the media infrastructure support, and the human rights ecosystem of backing, on top of what this has done with autocrats that have a bit of a permission to go on offense and are challenging many of you right now with a sense of impunity. So what do we do about it? This is where, at the Endowment, we've been adapting, one, the sense of being able to move with the speed of crisis. And so we have an entire model that is built on agility, that is built on a different approach that has always been the local agency. Our staff speaks 45 languages. We have long-term relationships of trust. You know some of our partners. Most of our partners you do not know and won't know. They are the ground game. They are the ground game inside closed societies that are actually quite difficult to get support to. So in this moment, as surveillance has gone up, we've enhanced digital physical security. We've adopted our own stablecoin digital currency to leverage that. We've brought in lean management expert reviews to run a business process review of how we actually can decrease the labor that goes into the grant-making process. We've done a streamlining of what are we required to do based on public funding, and what can we scale back so that we live by our ethos of actually uplifting. Our whole strategy is how to find amazing folks and give them uplift here, and to lean in on that wraparound, providing that comprehensive support. So right now, we're in the process of laying out a new strategy, a new business execution plan, and despite the disruptions of showing how you can maximize the dollar that goes to the front line of the fight. There are no intermediaries, no contractors, no for-profit folks. It's exactly how to move money into the front line. For us, the focus that we put then is on where it is hard for philanthropy to go, and that's the ground game. That's the ground game inside, particularly inside closed societies. And so part of what we're doing in this moment of bolstering public funds is we're standing up a venture fund for freedom that is helping to remove barriers to private philanthropy, that helps ensure that there is local context, people that have the relationships of trust, that have the security mechanisms, that know how to move money into difficult environments, and that can handle the political retribution that you get when North Korean hackers come after you, because they will. That's our life. And so what we're doing is trying to build a parallel way that bolsters the public investment with private investment, that expands Álvaro's point. We have to make freedom investable, because after all, the source of our prosperity in free societies, the fact that we live in rule of law, have sanctity of contracts, so that we enjoy the structures of freedom that come with democracy, we have to be able to remove the barriers to invite our citizens to be part of this, because coming out of this funk, if you will, for democracy, this recession, it's not going to be a government-led democratic wave. It's going to be a people-led democratic wave. And so this moment is a moment that I think does call for actually opening up how we actually get private philanthropists, citizens, not just with a sense of support, but a sense of solidarity, and that funding comes from tapping those who have benefited from freedom so that those who don't can profit from that. And that's our task, that's our goal right now.
So bravo. So this moment has caused you to think diversification. You have a venture fund you're raising for. Will it be a 501c3?
So we actually are a private 501c3. This is partly why we have been able to
And that makes
manage the
you,
environment.
because of your corporation, because of your organizational
Correct.
documents,
So
you're
we were
able to
founded as a
create-
private foundation, then
funded
mandated
by the US
Congress,
Congress.
then with the appropriation in a way that actually ensures the independence of governance. So the whole founding idea, even when President Reagan sort of gave the speech that launched this with Congress, was the whole idea was that private actors need to support private actors. It was built on a tradition of labor unions supporting solidarity, others, labor unions. So get the governments out and let organized pillars of private life, whether it's the parties, labor, business, as well as citizens, human rights defenders, judges, rule of law, lawyers, and create those relationships of trust. So this is not about a contract. It is not about a short-term KPI. It is about investing in people-to-people relationships, people that share that cause for freedom, that actually build those bonds among free peoples so that it's a people-led movement for a democratic wave.
What is your funding goal?
$100 million in private funds to catalyze the billion that we'll put on the table in public funds.
Álvaro says 40 billion is necessary. Do you agree that over the next 10 years, what is your estimate that is needed? Because you just talked about the figures that authoritarians are putting in versus
Well, I will tell
democracy
you,
funders.
$1 through an authoritarian regime and $1 through a EU or US government agency is valuable. It is not the same. It is not the same as $1 through the endowment, $1 through private foundations. This is the benefit. When you are giving out, so if you're USAID, which did great work, they have very large contracts. Their average is 5 million, but they also do like $5 billion contracts with 7 for-profit contractors that have huge overhead rates. That it's not the way to do this. Mm-hmm. And so
your average outlay is $180 million, or I'm sorry, $180,000 per organization.
That's right. 180,000 is our average. It goes from, we'll do 22,000 to reopen safe houses in Rangoon to 7-figure gifts. It ranges in between, but it is built around the local agency of actors. And of all of our spending, we do research, we do development, we other things, but 85 cents of every dollar goes out to the front line, not through intermediaries. And I think holding ourselves to that standard means that, yes, we have a big number. We have a big number to meet, but we don't need to match the autocrats. Democrats, small d Democrats working together, more agile, can outmaneuver. And after all, what's our strength? It is that fire that burns in people. That's all we're tapping, is letting people have pursue their sense of dignity. And when we get governments out of the way, we have billions of allies. And that's what we have to harness in this pushback.
The fire in the belly of individuals like Pema, right? Who's on the front line. So as you hear this conversation about the diversification of funding, an increase, sort of a maybe rethinking amongst the philanthropic community about doubling down on democracy work, how are you thinking about the diversification? Does this give you hope? And what is your number one concern in this moment?
I'll just say in this moment, the biggest thing that gives me hope is, as Damon said, the relationship that we're able to build with funders. That is, so for anyone who is from a funder organization, a slightly bigger check really helps. We appreciate it. But having that relationship where you actually know the people that are doing the work and care about their work and care about them and trust in their leadership, that's what gives me hope. That gives me hope that when there's a moment of crisis, it's not just my work or my movement on the line. This person who's part of my team is going to fight like hell to make sure that our movements can continue doing the work that we do. That's what gives me hope at a time when there's a global funding crisis. And I would say the thing that probably is the most concerning, it's just been a theme throughout this Oslo Freedom Forum, is the way in which technology is changing the rate at which everything is happening. A technological advancement that was taking 20 years to happen 5 years ago is now happening in 5 months. And I think that we are at a very critical time right now where the philanthropic world and all of us in the world have an opportunity to decide, does this advancement go on the balance sheet of authoritarians, or does it get harnessed onto the balance sheet on the activist and movement side?
So can you talk more specifically about how that's hitting you?
Sure. What I'll say is that activists are perpetually under-resourced. Anyone who's an activist in here can attest to that.
By definition.
By definition. Our movements don't have the funding that we need to be as technologically advanced as authoritarians in many cases. But don't get me wrong, that has never once stopped us. Never once, any of us. That has never once stopped us. But if we want activists to have this outsized impact, if we want activists and movement leaders to multiply the return on our investments, we need to invest in them. Because at the end of the day, activists will continue fighting, whether or not there are funders. But with funders on our side and our team, we can reach levels that we've never imagined. We can build a world in which this democratic backslide can end, because it's been too long since we've been having this democratic backslide. And every activist that I've met here, that I've known anywhere in the world, I know that I trust those people. They're the ones that are going to put an end to this democratic backslide. They're the ones that are going to win democracy, free elections, and freedom for their countries and their people. They're going to end occupations. But do we want to see that happening at a rapid pace or at a delayed pace? This is the question that philanthropists and funders really need to be asking, I think, themselves.
I'd like to give an opportunity to anybody in the audience to ask a question of our panel, and I want to be able to get Greg and Álvaro back in, and we'll weave you guys in if there's something you're dying to add to this conversation. Is there anybody in the audience? Do we have microphones? We have one right here, one right there. Do you want to just say it and I'll repeat the question? Go ahead. And we'll make it a brief, concise question if you don't mind. Thanks.
I would like to say that I'm a grantee of NED.
Uh-huh.
And without them, we had our project. We went to them. Without them, we wouldn't have
So what's your question?
started. My question is, the problem that we are facing now is not only funding, it's that we are facing a coalition of
Okay, go ahead. So she's a funder of NED, and she was impacted by the NED freeze. And your question is?
No, my question is, what we need is more than funding, because our enemies are it's a coalition of states, so we need intelligence.
And your question is?
How can we address that?
How can we address the fact that it's more than just funding that is needed by the grantees? Álvaro, Ned, any of you guys want to take it? Go ahead.
We need to create a freedom accelerator, a multidisciplinary freedom accelerator that has a brain trust of intelligence and technology and security and due diligence, that has a brain trust of active researchers with robust scientific data and a global standard for data on freedom and democracy that the activists can use for their capacities, and also that has other scholars and management consultants and trained lawyers and AI experts that will help the activists beyond the check that the philanthropists will provide with tackling those premises. The second thing that I wanted to add is that in order to have resilient and open societies and support the frontline movements, the biggest investment that a philanthropist can do right now is to invest in Bitcoin.
Invest in what?
In Bitcoin.
In Bitcoin. I'm so glad you brought it up. We have not had a conversation. We're talking about funding, and we're talking about funding to places all over the world, and we haven't talked about crypto, and we haven't talked about Bitcoin. So
Bitcoin is a store of value, is open source, is accessible and reliable for everyone, is money that dictators hate. And once the 501c3s are closed in Nicaragua or in Venezuela, some of those movements that require more than only the philanthropic giving, you can create open wallets and you can send them resources through Bitcoin.
how much do you guys use Bitcoin?
Sorry.
Do you use Bitcoin?
I do not.
We need to start on that.
I'll receive a Bitcoin and then I'll start using it.
Okay.
The second thing that I wanted to mention is that Bitcoin is growing in value. If philanthropic organizations and foundations have 20 or 30% of their endowment in Bitcoin, it will grow over time. That will help to sustain the funding when crises come to support the activists in the front lines. And thirdly, the Human Rights Foundation is one of the premier organizations in the world that have the intersection of Bitcoin, AI, and the fight for freedom. So we're in the right place.
Bravo. Bravo. There's a question right here. I don't know if we can get a microphone to this gentleman over here, and then I'll come to you. We can, if we keep it tight, we can get a couple in.
Really quickly, mostly for Damon, I think. There's been, I think everyone in this room can agree mostly on what human rights means. In the United States, I think there's a bit of a redefinition of that in some ways, in somewhat sinister ways. Money for or support for white South Africans who are landowners over LGBTQ rights, for example, or support for Russia's right to be free from NATO rather than Ukraine's right to exist. From Ned, are you experiencing pressure on that in the funding? Because I know you guys have done a lot of great funding on those areas. Are you feeling pressure now with the next budget that you won't be able to do those anymore? If so, how are you guys handling that? Are you still going to be able to promote the ideals that most of us in this room do care about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the core of the endowment is that its character is set up to have independent decision making, so that actually there is no U.S. government engagement or involvement in any decision making related to what we do. The way it was built was that the board has to have representative business, representative labor, Democrats and Republicans. So we have to represent a sense that there's an underpinning of support in our country for what we're doing. But does that mean Russia remains our largest program? When it comes to issues like LGBT rights, I've been up on the Hill consistently on this. Ned doesn't fund gay pride parades or gay marriage campaigns necessarily, but if you're on death row in Uganda, or if you're part of the underground Russian resistance as an LGBT group, that's a democracy strategy. Yeah. And so what we find is that the way that we're constructed was to be the exact opposite of a political cycle. This is what can happen in U.S. government funding. All of a sudden you go to climate justice to, I mean, you're going back and forth. We were built to have to be in an area that actually calls it as fundamental American values that can get a broad degree of agreement and the expression of that. And so that's nurtured and protected the character of the endowment as a private institution, publicly funded as America's Foundation for Freedom. And I have seen already in the past, the Biden administration had a lot of difficulty with what to do with Burma. Anybody that knows Burma knows that the endowment is in deep in Burma. I see some of our Core Institute colleagues who do this. When, in the first Trump administration, all funding was cut off to Central America. Our Central America colleagues know that's why, for us, consistency, long-term relationships where there's a basis, it's the character of how we operate. And that can
Do you feel that that's threatened, perhaps, in the next button? Okay, good. That's very optimistic.
The governance structure.
Let's get one more in. This gentleman here.
Thanks very much. Sergey Christo. There are lots of representatives from organizations in this hall. Would you consider supporting individual research? You know, people with no background, no back record, as an organization would have. And particularly, my question to Sir John Templeton Foundation. I was a whistleblower, so I spent 20 years in asset management industry, and now I'm researching into Western investments, particularly sustainable funds, investing in oppressive regimes. Okay. I spent 30,000 euros of my money.
Okay, the question is, will you support individual research?
Individual research.
Is this something you consider? Are you willing to receive an application for funding from the gentleman in the third row?
The government won't let us, is the short answer.
Well,
we can only give to 501c3s or to charities internationally. We can't give to individuals.
But research in general. I mean, you fund research.
Absolutely, research. So what I recommend to you is, you know, and this is where these conferences are a really great opportunity, find an institute at some university that wants to bring you on even for free, and you're a fellow now. and you can raise money for your position.
So you would fund him if he goes to a university first.
We have to,
and then you could fund the
or a
university
think
for the
tank,
research.
or some sort of other public charity is what we have, is the test we have.
Okay.
So there are ways to do it. We can't give directly to individuals, unfortunately.
We have 16 seconds.
All right.
But that's fungible, just a little. First of all, I just want to thank all of you for being here. And this is a wonderful panel of activism on all fronts, but also sort of dynamic thinking around funding for democracy. Is there any final words of wisdom that any of you just are burning that you feel like you didn't quite get in? Or words of wisdom or hope? You don't have to, but I feel like, what gives you hope, Damon? We're just going to go to firing line. We're going down the squad. 1 or 2 words, what gives you hope? Greg.
Oh my God, you start with the pessimist.
Okay, no. Álvaro.
Go somewhere else.
Álvaro.
Philanthropy.
Philanthropy.
Love of humankind. So for the philanthropists in the room, we don't have to do it for the tax exempts or the ego-driven issues. Let's do it for the right moral principles.
Pema.
I think what gives me hope is looking at all the different activists and movements, because Tibet is something that I've cared about since the day I was born. Since before I was born, it's a movement and cause that has eclipsed every issue. My grandfather was a political prisoner, and both of my parents were stateless. It's something that is in our DNA. And when I come here and I meet activists from all different countries, I see it in your eyes. It's in your DNA as well. And funding crisis or not, we will keep fighting, and that's what gives me hope.
Damon.
What gives me hope is Alexa, Pedro, Julia. You know the people sitting next to you. You know what you've done. It's awesome. It gives me hope because you won't stop. As you said, you won't stop if you don't have 1 penny. That's the power of freedom. And ultimately, I see those that have to actually compete for elected office to be really proud. Everybody wants to see a democratic transition in Venezuela.
Yeah.
You can help us get this right.
You got 1 word, Greg?
Okay, so you've all said things I was going to say. Thanks. I should have gone first, but I'm going to say a weird thing. You talked about how much money authoritarian governments are spending on this. There's a reason. They're afraid of people like you.
Yeah.
And so when I'm here and I see this, now I get it. So thank you.
All right. Greg, Damon, Álvaro, Pema, thank you all for everything you're doing. You guys are doing amazing work. Keep it going. Keep it going. All right. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.